What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. You're listening to Racially Speaking. Of course, I'm your host, David Phipps, and you're listening to episode 52. Look, I just wanted to hop on here and give a little intro and check-in to those of you that especially are, dedicated listeners to the podcast, because it's been a minute. Many of you know me well and know John Mark well, but for those of you that don't, look, we typically operate just personally on a very semester to semester life schedule. What we mean is, we work with college students, so they're on a school semester schedule. We both have kids that are in school and off in the summer and whatnot. So much of our lives, personally and professionally, are very much attached to the school semester schedule. So, look, every once in a while, we think it's good to take a break. We probably need to be better at taking breaks. Maybe you noticed, maybe you didn't. But anyway, wanted to just keep it real, do some due diligence, and let you know what we've been doing. Really nothing to it other than we decided just to take a short break at the end of summer, which, I know a lot of you guys were on vacations and wrapping up summer as well. So we thought that'd be a good time to just kind of take a check out and a mental health break and just take care of ourselves a little bit by enjoying kind of some of the rest of summer. We didn't check out completely. We were still posting a little bit and trying to stay informed. Never want to be one to completely shut off from what's going on around us, but also good to be able to pump the brakes and acknowledge that although this work takes dedication and is important, we're not going to save the world with one podcast, obviously. So glad to be back. Also missed it. It's also very therapeutic to be doing this and having these conversations, especially as important as the one we're about to have, or I'm about to have with my friend Karen Fischer. But before we jump in, just wanted to update a couple things. Many of you are part of our Patreon community, but just wanted to go ahead and plug that real quick at the front end of this. Please consider joining, if you haven't already, our Patreon community. You can join that at the link in the show notes, or just go to, I need to be better at remembering this off the top of my head, but I believe it's patreon.com/racially speaking, and it's easy to find. Look, for as low as $1 a month, you can help support the podcast, helping keep it afloat and operating well. But also, we give away 100% of our profit to philanthropic endeavors. I like to say, it sounds like a fancy term, but we like to give money away. We just gave away $400 to two separate first-generation BIPOC college students to purchase their textbooks. So we're really proud of that. Really thank you so much to the Patreon community that's been part of that. And if you want to be part of that, for as low as $1, $3, $5 or more a month, you can be part of that and also get some cool bonuses by being part of the community as well. We hope to continue to give more and more money away to college students to purchase their textbooks and also other causes down the road, which you can stay up to date with as being part of that Patreon community. In fact, I just gave an update to the patrons on our Patreon page earlier today as I'm recording this. So please consider being a part of that. Please. If you have any questions, please reach out, email us, and we can go from there. I think that's about it. So let's get into the interview. I interviewed my friend Karen Fischer. You guys might have heard me mention her in the past, especially if you follow me on social media. I met Karen 4 or 5 months ago now, I think. And we hit it off. I met her at a Mom's Demand event, and she's a lovely, lovely, fantastic lady. She's been in the social justice space for quite some time. She's a wealth of knowledge, as you'll see and hear. And so, we were very, I enjoyed talking to her from the jump. We hit it off with our views on justice, our hearts for justice. We had similar backgrounds as far as faith goes, families, and just kind of our passion for justice. If you don't know what Mom's Demand is, it's a terrific organization that helps combat gun violence. and make the world really better and safer for everybody. Really love what they are doing. We're big advocates for what they're doing over there. This isn't any kind of sponsorship or anything. So encourage you guys to check them out as well. And so before we get into it, as I appreciate Karen doing at the beginning of this, look, if you know someone or are close to it, or especially if you are someone that is a survivor of gun violence, trigger warning. I never know if it's, if that's even helpful to say nowadays at the beginning, if it's helpful or if it's less helpful. But Karen, at the very beginning, before we even jumped into it, did give a shout out to people who might just be warned. We talk about some, nothing too graphic or anything, but it's just heavy topics. And so we want to look out for you if you feel like this isn't something you can listen to, or, need to go through it more slowly and check out a little bit or skip some parts. I don't know. I just encourage you to do that because your mental health and your overall health is far more important than listening to this. Last, I think it should be very challenging for, at some parts, I know it was for me, for some of you to listen. And so I hope overall, I hope it's really clear that the only agenda of this podcast is to foster conversation that helps bring about justice and equity, and just to have nuanced conversation about these justice topics. Although, we think that there's a right and wrong way to do a lot of stuff, there's a lot of nuance that has to be had in order to get to those places. So we address stuff in this interview, like the polarized culture we're living in as it relates to gun violence and other stuff. There's really a lot here. I got a lot out of it. I hope you guys too, and I would love to hear from you after the episode with questions or just, honestly, I really mean this, criticism and compliments, of course. So, okay, that's enough for me. I hope this is helpful. Please enjoy this conversation I have with my friend Karen Fischer.
Life in 3 dimensions got me bent and got me twisted. I know I done said a lot, but I should probably stop pretending. I don't really hold the key and I can't really push a button. I just step up to the mic and try my very best to bust it, but I ran out of breath. It's tight in my chest, my feet just might fail. I can't stand the pressure.
All right, welcome Racially Speaking family. I'm joined, as I've already introduced her a little bit, but I'm gonna let her do that in a minute, by my good friend, newer friend, but quickly became good friend, Karen Fischer. Karen, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Yeah. It's been a long time coming, but I'm glad that we have been able to work this time out to have this interview. And I mean, I know that how I've even grown in understanding some of the things we're going to talk about from just short time knowing you and our conversations. I know that this will be very helpful for listeners, and ultimately, like, these are some heavy topics. I'll preface that, and heavy things to think about. But ultimately, I think there's, regardless of where everyone's coming from, listeners, I think my hope is that we will arrive at some really good conclusions that are good for everybody on here. So, Karen, for our listeners, can you introduce yourself a little bit? And
sure. Before I start, I want to say that, as you said, these are we're going to talk about some heavy issues. And if anyone listening is a gun violence survivor, that they should take care of themselves. Feel free to leave the conversation at any time. If it gets too much for you, your self-care is much more important than anything I'm going to say.
Absolutely.
So I am a person who has long been involved in justice issues. Started when I was a kid. I'm a Lutheran minister's daughter. I'm from the Scandinavian Norwegian culture of the upper Midwest. And one of the longstanding values that I learned growing up is that you always help other people. in the rural communities, if a farmer gets sick and can't bring in his crops, then the surrounding farmers do so for him. If someone is sick, I make chicken soup and offer it to them. I have some, by the way, if anyone needs some in my freezer.
Yeah, I think I'm starting not to feel too good.
And I was raised in the Lutheran Church. As I said, my father was a Lutheran minister, and the part of my upbringing that sticks with me most is Matthew 25 and Jesus' demonstration of what we're supposed to do in reaching out to people who are lesser than as seen by other people in society. And to raise a little good trouble, as he did in the synagogue when he threw out the money changers.
Yeah.
Those are the values that move me.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing a little bit about yourself right there, and we'll find out a lot more about you as I ask some of these other questions. But okay, so you've been, in the social justice space or game for a long time. You've talked about how your faith at the time propelled you into that, which is very relatable and helpful to myself and people listening. Specifically, we're going to focus in on the gun violence layer of it, and kind of go into that because of kind of the immediacy of what's been going on, and we don't have 10 hours to cover everything that you could speak about. So I wanted to, of course, ask you about that. We met at a Mom's Demand event, and then have kind of grown a relationship from that, and I picked your brain a little bit. So you wanted to move this question up, so let's just go there for a second. So what would you say most people misunderstand about gun violence? Because, there's a very polarized view. I'm going to ask you more about polarization as well, but what do you think, just off the bat, you think people most misunderstand about it?
That it's an urban problem. When in fact it's very much a problem all across all locations and places where people live and work. It's just as much a rural problem as it is a suburban or city problem. Although the gun violence in urban areas tends to get more coverage.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two, and not necessarily number two, it has little to do with mental illness.
Okay.
Very little to do. Other countries have just about the same number and types of mental illness that people in the United States do. The difference is the access to guns.
Okay.
The data is clear on many different levels. What is so disheartening after there's usually a mass shooting, that the media and other people talk about mental illness as if it was the core of the problem.
Yeah.
And it's not at all. And I get a little emotional about it because I spent most of my career as a mental health counselor.
Okay. I forgot that. So that's perfect, because I wanted to ask you more about the mental health element of it. Forgot that was also an expertise of yours. So that's great.
There's some more misinformation. The majority of gun deaths are from suicide.
Okay.
And
majority,
like 60% of gun deaths are suicides.
Okay. I never heard majority. I knew that it was higher than people thought. Or
majority, and
I know a lot of people don't like to even include that as part of the stat, which doesn't make sense, because it's
violence against self.
Right, yourself, and it still involves guns and access and
right
mental health and
Yeah,
all that.
people who do take their own lives are more at risk, for gun suicide, for harming themselves. But absent the gun, they are less likely to die from an attempt to take their own lives.
Okay.
Like 90% of the people who use a gun to take their own lives die. Using other means, the death rate is extremely much smaller.
Okay. Why, you said you were even getting emotional about it, but why is it so disheartening, your words, for people to kind of blame the increase in, really epidemic of gun violence on mental health?
Because it's a dodge. It is deliberate misinformation on the part of the gun lobby to deflect attention elsewhere.
Okay.
Away from easy access to guns, which they have a monetary interest in promoting. And they've done rather well lately doing so.
Yeah. Can you break it down even more? Because I think I understand what you're talking about. So why is it a dodge, and what is it dodging?
It's dodging the responsibility of gun manufacturers and their lobbyists, the NRA, for promoting the sale of more guns to more people in more places, which results in more deaths and injuries from guns.
Okay. Would an example be the recent Uvalde shooting?
Yeah.
And then Governor Greg Abbott saying literally, we're not in a gun violence epidemic, we're in a mental health crisis. Like, why is that something that what is that an example of what you're talking about?
Absolutely. Okay. And he had the gall to say that after he cut mental health spending in Texas in the prior budget.
Right. So is that more? That's more. It's the.
It's the cynicism.
Okay, I was thinking fair to say the hypocrisy, cynicism behind statements like that. So yeah, I even wrote a question down to say, like, so for argument's sake, let's say, okay, you're right, to the Greg Abbotts and people that like to say that when a mass shooting occurs. Is it fair to say that is so disheartening because it's let's just say that is true. Are you also saying that even if it was, we're not actually doing anything about the mental health crisis, if that's really what they believe?
Yeah.
Okay. Like you said, cutting spending and go ahead.
Right. In fact, in one of the bills, I think the Inflation Reduction Act, or so what it was called, there was a huge amount of money set aside for mental health. And also in the Gun Violence Reduction Act that went through finally after many years, there was also money set aside for mental health. One of the mental health issues that we are having is the trauma caused by incidents like the shooting at UNC day before yesterday.
Yeah.
And years of students undergoing drills.
Yeah.
Those are traumatic. So it's so convoluted and so messed up that it's really hard to know which end is up and which end is down when it comes to the effects of gun violence in this country. They're huge.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's there's definitely a stereotype or a cliche thread of belief out there, I would say, that mental health is present with gun violence, specifically with mass shooters. One, that's kind of the main thing we hear about nowadays, both because they're happening more and then for sure political reasons at times. But
it's simply not true.
I was gonna say, so like there's the belief out there that like, okay, these people are just insanos and they're an exception. That's the issue. Guns, the whole. It falls under the umbrella, I think, of that, the cliche saying, guns don't kill people, people kill people. Like, what do you have to say to that? Like, can you explain why? You already said that's not true. Like, why is that not true? Like, why is that unacceptable?
Because we'll deal with the facts first. There was some studies done by a researcher named Tom Gaber that he researched 1,000 mass shootings.
Mm-hmm.
And in only 11 could there be identified definitively that there was a mental illness issue with the shooter.
Yeah.
Period. End of sentence. What they're motivated by, and if you listen to coverage following a mass shooting, you will hear the FBI profilers and so forth say, mass shooters are often people who are holding a grudge.
Right.
Who feel like they've been victimized and are taking revenge on so-called others who they think may be the people who have hurt them.
Right.
That's a character issue. That's not a mental health issue.
Yeah, I think that's important to differentiate, especially as a healthcare professional. I'd say character issues and mental health issues are completely different. It's actually dangerous, I think, to conflate the two.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Others are especially shooters who are in neighborhoods that are distressed, and there aren't very many jobs. There's not even a grocery store. There's a lot of drugs and drug dealing, and hopelessness, despair, which are not mental health issues, are underlying, the taking of lives among street gangs, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. I had something. I was gonna say maybe it'll come back to me with the mental health element, but can
I add on to what I said?
Yeah.
So the way you deal with areas where there are a lot of shootings, let's say Baltimore, what you do is you launch intensive programs reaching out to the shooters and the victims at the hospital, at the friends who come to visit at the hospital. That's one way of dealing with interrupting violence and getting the people who are involved into job training, or education, mentor them, make sure that social services are reaching out and making sure that the family has enough food and decent housing, et cetera. A 360 approach.
Yeah.
You do that in the neighborhoods. Baltimore has both the hospital program and the neighborhood intervention program, where you're throwing a lot of resources at people who are in danger of being shooters or being shot again. And that is, in Baltimore, significantly reducing the homicides.
Wow. Okay. It's kind of a more well-rounded approach.
Yeah, 360. Okay. So it's reducing the access to guns, yes, but it's also solving an underlying problem, the underlying problem of poverty in certain neighborhoods where there is a high number of shootings. Okay. You interrupt the the code of taking revenge for your friends or family member getting shot.
Yeah.
Interrupt that cycle.
Right. Okay, so
and that brings hope.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is I'm just gonna ask this because I think this is where people on either side could camp out based on what you just said. So like, if you had to pick one of those things to focus on more than the other, or first, like which would it be? So like, because I think obviously the answer is we need both, but I think
depends upon who your target population is.
Well, real quick, I think like based on what you just said, so it should be, a more well-rounded approach and attacking poverty and whatnot. I think like let's paint with broad strokes for a second. I think that's helpful to get to truth sometimes. I think that somebody could hear that and think, oh, see, like that, like she even said it herself, like, we have a poverty problem, like that's like the new mental health one, like we have a poverty problem. But you're obviously saying also restrict the access to guns. So like,
you got to do both or all, rather.
Okay.
So you can attack the problem also by educating people that they must lock up guns in their homes.
Yeah.
We can reduce suicides. We can reduce unintentional shootings where a 5-year-old shoots his 3-year-old sister because he picked up a gun and the father had left unsecured in the back of the car.
Mm-hmm. How important are those rules and laws? Because I think somebody, especially that doesn't own a gun or have much experience with guns, I'm admitting that as I'm navigating these conversations, like how important are rules or laws like that of safe storage laws?
Yes, safe storage laws. We have a weak one in Virginia that needs strengthening. We, in my opinion, we need to require that if there is a home where children live or visit, all guns must be locked up. Mm-hmm. And, that's only about 30% of the population of adults that even have guns in their homes. 70% don't. So if the 70% who don't also have kids going to those homes, then the parents need to ask, if you have any guns, how are they secured? Before their children go there. Grandpa may have grown up with guns, and in his chair this is a true story, under the seat of his favorite chair, he keeps a handgun. Mm-hmm. Well, Grandpa, if he wants his grandchildren to come over, his kids might say, Pops, you can't leave that gun there when the kids are here.
Yeah. Is that, okay, so is that realistic to be stronger and to police well? Like you said, Virginia has a little bit too weak of one. Mm-hmm. Which I actually think like Virginia is not, we're not the worst with this kind of stuff. But so Virginia has a weaker one. What does it look like? And do you have data on what it looks like for there to be a stronger one and like the direct results of that?
You can't just pass a law that requires homes where kids live for the guns to be locked up without educating the public about why that's important.
Okay.
So again, it's not just the law, it's not just reducing access to guns, but it's also educating the public. So, for example, Moms Demand Action has a nationwide program where over 10 million kids or parents get information from the schools about the importance of locking up guns in homes. Okay. It's called Be Smart. And we can talk about that more later.
Great title. So what does a weak storage law sound like? Like I don't know.
I'll give you a strong one.
Okay. Yeah.
That if this is a law that we passed in Connecticut when I lived there, Ethan Strong had gone, 15-year-old had gone to his friends, neighbors, and it turns out they were playing with the father's unsecured Glock stored in a closet in a plastic container with the ammunition. And the boys were playing with the gun, and Ethan was shot and killed. So a strong law was passed that if that happens, if a child is injured in a home where the gun should have been secured by law, then the owner of the gun is charged with a felony.
Okay.
Now, the weaker version of that was it was a low misdemeanor with a $500 fine.
Okay.
And there's been a lot of effort in Connecticut to educate people about the change in the law.
Do we lead? Is Virginia on the misdemeanor side?
We're on the weak side.
Okay.
So, for example, the kid who shot the teacher in Virginia Beach, I believe it was, the law, there was no law that the mother could be charged with that was a gun secured law. And she was charged with something else, I think reckless endangerment or something on that order.
Okay, gotcha. That's a great example to at least get a bearing on what those types of things mean. Yeah, I appreciate that. That's helpful. Okay. Let's move into this for a second, because this is more of the hot button issue. Certainly not the entire issue. Hopefully that's clear, listeners, but I think it's important and worth talking about. AR-15s.
Right.
Right. Okay. So these are the ones that are, and I wanted to ask you about polarization. These are the ones you hear about because of the mass shootings and social media and all that. You know, we plan to do. We're always going to do this interview, and you know, you can't make this stuff up. You know, just as we sit here 2 days ago, another AR-15 shooting down in Jacksonville, Florida.
Right.
Literally, you know, white supremacists targeting Black people.
Right.
That's, you know, just objectively what happened. That's, you know, both sides of the aisle realize that and all that whatnot. We'll break that down a little bit more. But for a second, so the AR-15s are almost always the weapon of choice for these mass shootings.
Mm-hmm.
And rightfully so, a lot of, you know, talk is, you know, about banning them, you know, altogether and stuff. And I will say, like, on one side, it's like ban AR-15s, you know, and then it's quickly, you know, all guns are bad. And then the other side's like, hey, look, most gun violence is with handguns, not AR-15s. So like, we're missing the point here. Yeah. Obviously it's you know, somewhere in between, but not, I don't think it's smack dab in the middle. I think there's, you know, some nuance here, but what are your opinions on this? Because, you know, without any emotion involved in it, which for this part of the argument, it's fair to say, like, yeah, sure, AR-15s are not responsible for the majority of gun violence, but they are responsible for all these mass shootings, and
they are the weapon of choice for mass shooters, yeah,
for a reason. And so there's a lot of just, and it's also tied to the mental health element, because obviously all these shooters of, you know, you can go Parkland, you can go to the Pulse nightclub, Jacksonville, Uvalde, you know, unfortunately we could keep naming more. And then it's tied to, well, these guys, you know, were suffering mental health or were insane, which we've kind of broken down of how that's not true. But it's also tied to another element of mental health of, okay, well, if we are in a mental health crisis, I actually looked some stuff up and I'd wonder if you know, corroborate it, but like it showed that a lot of these higher profile mass shootings the shooters often, they actually were flagged or detained or whatever you want to call it under whatever kind of mental health, protocol there was at some time. And somehow, literally, like one of them, I think there was like a clerical error. Like there was stuff fell through the cracks, or else, like in Jacksonville, the shooter purchased the guns legally, but had, been detained under
the Baker Act.
The Baker Act, which I will say, which I looked up again, please fill in, but is not without controversy. Like I know that it does seem like that. So the Baker Act, for those that don't know, and correct me if I'm wrong, Karen, but states that a mental health professional can detain somebody for 72 hours.
Right, but it's not reported. There's
right.
no legal penalty.
Okay, so and it's non-voluntary, or involuntary. So like, anyway, I'm not a Florida citizen. There's a lot of controversy around it, I will say. But anyway, there's a breakdown that he was able, because a lot of people want to say, oh, well, these people are purchasing these weapons illegally. It's like that's just not true. A lot of the time, they're purchasing legally.
He was also there was also a domestic violence violation that didn't result in arrest and therefore was not reported to the background check system. So there's a lot of holes there. And actually, a domestic violence record is a huge red flag for people who go on to shoot and kill other people.
Right. So what are your thoughts? Like, what is the
AR-15s?
Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the AR-15s were developed as a replacement for the M16 combat rifle. They were meant for combat.
Right.
And they're really good at killing a lot of people
quickly
and killing them, murdering them, not just shooting them, but killing them because of the velocity and the type of the weapon and the type of rounds used.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know that gun manufacturers are starting to make junior AR-15s for kids? I kid you not.
I did not. I've seen plenty of pictures of kids at gun shows holding guns. I didn't know if there's, a Happy Meal size.
So also there's new information that 25% of guns sold now are AR-15 type guns. What the gun lobby, what the gun manufacturers are trying to do is to get them to be popular, like handguns, which will make them harder to regulate. Not that they're in favor of regulating handguns either, which is, again, is a cynical element here.
Yeah.
We regulate machine guns, which are automatic, and it is really easy to change an AR-15 to an automatic. Instead of firing one bullet per trigger pull, it can send out multiple bullets per trigger pull, or just hold the trigger down until the magazine of 30, empties.
Yeah.
So we have what I'm getting to is we have a regulatory structure for machine guns. It is really, really hard to get a license to own a machine gun. And the least we can do is use the same or similar regulation to regulate AR-15s.
Yeah, the least.
At least.
Okay. Is that what
is harder to get?
Right. Okay, so on that, I was having this type of conversation with a friend, really good friend. Anyone thinks, that I purposely don't talk to people I disagree with very much, the opposite. Anyway, very good friend. We do not agree on a lot of this stuff, but have had really good conversation. But my friend asked me, it's like, I mean, look, David, have you ever owned or bought a gun? You're out here saying that it's too easy to purchase guns. And I'm like, in fairness, I'm like, no, I have not. I'll say I know a lot of data that, sure, I mean, if you're going to say that could be wrong, that's great. You can say that about anything. That's fine. But I kind of asked, I was like, okay, but how his point was it's not, and he's not a super, like, I dare you to come take my guns person or anything, but he's more just, look, he's a gun owner and just saying, like, it's not that easy to own a gun. And to me, that's where you get in a little bit of subjectivity, because I'm just like, okay, well, what do you think is not easy to own a gun? And you kind of explained it to me. And long story short, I arrived at the same conclusion. I was like, that sounds easy to me. Like that you had to wait. I can't remember how, like, X amount of time for your background check inside like an hour or 45 minutes, like, to get something that you got. I'm like, oh, you don't think that's easy? Like, you think that took you a long time? And so that's where I just think, it is tough if we keep arriving at impasses where we're not going to completely agree. But I just think there's some just objective, if you compare it to other countries, other cultures, that it's just like, there is so much data out there. Because I know a lot of people want to come back to, oh, well, it's a people issue, it's a culture issue, it's a mental health issue, it's a poverty issue. It's like, yeah,
No.
we can agree, but that, to turn a blind eye of the direct correlation of mass shootings, the availability of guns, the ease in which you can get them, and all the stuff that falls through the cracks, to me is just, I almost want you, Karen, to tell me that I'm wrong about some of this stuff, but I'm just like, it's just,
we don't have a gun.
You have to try to not see this kind of stuff.
Yeah. We don't have a gun culture in this country. We had a hunting culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And people, especially in Appalachia, people still use guns to shoot game to feed their families.
Mm-hmm.
It was, that's
which I'm not looking at as negative.
No.
Yeah, to be clear. Right.
I mean, where I grew up, there deer hunting is, Lord knows we need more deer hunters. We got too many deer. We even had a bear in our neighborhood. But anyway, my son-in-law is a hunter, and he and his dad hunt deer, duck, pheasant, and I enjoy eating with them. They're great cooks. That is the hunting culture. Mm-hmm. What we have, and that's what the NRA used to, be totally involved in, and still is. But unfortunately for gun manufacturers, there was a drop in the number, and continues to be a drop in the number of people who hunt. So they had to make money. Right. Yeah. So then they started promoting this. You have to protect yourself.
Yeah.
And it's gotten kind of scary for police, for example. I have a personal communication from a police chief that, whereas in the past when they do a stop, a traffic stop, maybe 1 in 10 people would be carrying. Now it's 9 in 10. I mean, it makes their job so much scarier.
That's good for the people who often want to say, pro-police, anti-BLM or something, want to protect the police. Like, that'd be a great way to protect police as well.
Right.
Correct. Yeah.
So I want to say this whole gun culture thing is pretty ginned up, given only 30% of adults in this country even own guns, any guns. And then 6% of that, 5 or 6% of that, are super gun owners. I mean, they have tons.
Yeah.
So I'm not being conspiratorial at all when I say that this is a big money-making enterprise to convince people they need guns for protection out in the streets and everywhere. And then they have successfully, the gun lobby, promoted being able to carry guns outside your home. And now we have guns being stolen from cars, guns that are not secured within the cars. So 20% of crime guns are now stolen from vehicles. I mean, it's nuts.
I think the storage thing has been, very powerful to hear about, because I'm just thinking about, not intentionally, but I'm thinking about arguments against, reducing gun violence. And one of the most common things I hear and read about are that people are committing crimes by stealing guns anyway. So then, that zeroes out. It's a zero-sum game. It's like, okay, well, that was a criminal stole the gun, so that was their fault. That wasn't a law. It's like, no, the laws can be made about preventing that from happening as well.
Right.
Like that's still giving access. It's not 100% just gun shops. It is a lot of that, but it's not. There's other ways we can prevent access to guns. And I can't. I should have pulled it up, but I can't get away from the stats of the U.S. versus any other country in the world on this stuff. But you just can't argue with that. That's what I come back to when people are like, well, blah, 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 it's the cause, blah, blah, it's the cause. So, we can talk all about that. We can even agree on how all that's interconnected, because it is. But that doesn't mean we can't expedite these things at the top to prevent stuff right off the bat.
Right. Like Australia. They had a mass shooting with, I can't remember the gun. I think it was a semi-automatic AR-15 type. And as a country, they decided that this was unacceptable. They set aside tax dollars to buy back guns and pass strong laws prohibiting their sale. And they haven't had a mass shooting like that since.
Right. So all that stuff directly correlates to, mass shootings and stuff. On that, so we're in America.
Yeah.
Karen, so what do you say? So we got to navigate America, the Constitution, our rights. What, if anything, is there a realistic or feasible path to take with something like that? Because that's never going to happen. Like, we're never going to do what Australia did. Is there something that is possible anywhere close to that is not possible, like, could it happen, but like feasible? Like, is America going to do it? Are we going to be able to unite on something that is anywhere approaching that level of reform and safety that is not infringing on our Second Amendment rights?
As interpreted by whom?
I was going to say, so like, what is misinterpreted by most people about the Second Amendment?
Well, they forget the first clause, a well-regulated militia. They emphasize the second part, shall not be infringed. Well, First Amendment shall not be infringed either. I mean, we allow a whole lot of language, but you're not allowed to yell fire in the middle of a crowded theater when there is no fire.
Yeah.
Right. So all of our rights have limits. And we as a country so far have elected people that decided there are virtually no limits. Except in states that have, coincidentally, lower gun shooting rates, lower gun deaths rates. And if you look at the strength of their laws, the ones with the laws that have a lot of teeth in them, those states have far less than places like Florida, which just enacted permitless carry. You can walk around with a gun in Florida with no permit, no checks, no training. And until you pull the trigger and hit somebody, you're not committing a crime. I mean, that's nuts.
Yeah. Speaking of Florida.
So
go ahead.
State by state, we are making headway. Minnesota just passed some really good gun laws, for example. It took them years to do it, but they finally elected the right people to the Senate and the House and the governor who were willing to do that.
Yeah. Okay, well, Florida. So I wanted to ask you about like polarization. So these topics are very polarizing. I think both sides can use them as political ploys for sure, right? Like, I mean, we pretty much know what, the super right-leaning side, where they land with, anything and any type of mention of guns or gun control is an infringement on our rights, and we got to stand strong and not let anything happen.
Which is the NRA policy.
Right, which quite literally is true. Like, people are loosening gun laws and, things that I read this. I looked into this and read it on an episode a little farther back. But even, in Tennessee, some proposed bills were failed and were rejected that were literally just about decreasing gun violence. It wasn't even, any about taking guns away from anybody. It wasn't anything like that. It was just, and it was something that I was like, this is the type of thing that I cannot, it does actually make me at times feel hopeless, because I'm like, why would you not want to decrease gun violence? And it was stuff that was about decreasing gun violence that the most right-wing pro Second Amendment person, I was like, should agree on, if they even just want to save their fate, like their name. But they're so at times blind to any whiff of a gun argument is no, nothing, looser, like free for all. And just the unwillingness to see how that directly correlates with gun violence is just wild to me. And that is connected to, we're not just spitting out stuff like that. It is connected to money, like Karen's saying. Like, these same politicians are literally backed by the NRA. Like, you can look that up. It's facts. So getting to Florida, what happened just in Jacksonville recently, is it fair? And I want to have a nuanced conversation on this. I know what a gut reaction from both of us could be, but is it fair for people to say that Governor Ron DeSantis' policies and rhetoric caused something like the Jacksonville shooting?
Governor is a stochastic terrorist. He uses language to make it permissible for people to target Black people, to target gay people, to target trans people. And you don't have to look far to read even his direct language versus in between the lines as to what his intentions are.
Yeah.
Trump is a master at this. Giving permission to people on the fringes who might be vulnerable to doing violence to say it's really okay, because these are others.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in that sense, yes, he didn't pull the trigger. He didn't buy the gun. But he set it up to make Black people others.
I think of people in this example, like Ron DeSantis, Trump, whatever, as a great example of what people arguing against that very notion would be of, well, it's a people issue. Like, it's not, a gun issue. I'm like, this is a fantastic example of it being a people issue if you want to go there, of somebody in power emboldening, because he is emboldening people. He didn't explicitly say, hey, go start hunting black people.
Mm-hmm.
But his rhetoric, his language gives license to do that. It emboldens people to feel like that is okay. And this type of thing doesn't just happen in Florida. It just happened up in Buffalo. It happened in South Carolina. And so I think it's fair in a sense of almost what do you expect to happen type thing, especially if you don't do anything about it or condone it. And
exactly.
If people don't know what we're talking about, Ron DeSantis he's made it his entire platform to be racist. That's facts. And that offends some people, but it is just facts. And that's not even a provocative thing to say. It just is. His whole platform is the anti-woke mob, and that's how he runs Florida. I don't think at this point it doesn't seem like there's any danger of him actually getting the presidential candidacy or anything, but he's still in power down in Florida. And that type of thing. So this one I want to talk about with polarization. Yeah. I don't think polarization is almost never helpful. I want to pull some
I want to define polarization, though.
Yeah, go ahead.
Americans are not polarized on gun policy.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, good. Yeah,
85% of Americans, 90% want all gun people who are all people buying guns to go through background checks.
Yeah.
Even a majority of Americans want to ban AR-15s. It's not a huge majority, but it is still a majority.
So why isn't that happening?
Because of the politicians who are backed by people with a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily the issue. It is for the gun manufacturers. But a lot of these other big money people, like the Koch brothers, who are big in fossil fuels, they want people in office who will vote their way and make sure they don't have to pay many taxes and are as unregulated as possible. And they donate to candidates who will, follow their wishes. But that's kind of in the background. That's not really what the politicians are campaigning on. They're not campaigning on increasing fossil fuels and deregulating, those companies. They're campaigning on guns. They're campaigning on anti-wokeness, which is such a crock. Right. It's a big bait and switch.
Right.
It is nuanced. It is difficult to talk about the gun issue. But when you talk to people like I talk to here, who are gun owners, and you talk to them issue by issue, oh yeah, I'm in favor of that. I'm in favor of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to get to even your perspective on responsible gun ownership as well. Real quick, we can put a bow on. I might be putting it too delicately, but some of the Florida stuff. But what we're talking about, if anyone's not really following, Governor DeSantis, is making it his mission to even, outlaw. There's the anti-gay bill, Bill 999, all the stuff that's just outlawing, revising history, talking about you can go out, listeners, and look this stuff up. There are videos they're starting to put up. I don't think they're quite to the point where they have to show them in the classroom, but they're given to parents to show to their kids. It's literal propaganda. Mm-hmm. It's the audio's out there. It's cartoons, Christopher Columbus, and Frederick Douglass, and it's talking about why slavery was necessary, and it actually wasn't that bad, and that Black people benefited from it. They learned skills that enabled them to make ways for themselves, and all. Like it's out there, complete.
Ludicrous.
Like it's like I thought what I learned growing up was ludicrous. Like this is egregiously and explicitly lies. Stuff like that, people, I say this all the time, people are probably sick and tired of hearing it, but these conversations we're having, obviously this one because it's about a little more life and death, but these conversations about justice and race and all this stuff isn't just let's grab coffee and have a little talk over some policies that are controversial, could go over one way or the other. It's life and death. These are life and death things, and I think it's, to answer my own question, it doesn't make me feel great to say, it's fair to blame him for people dying, but it also makes complete sense, because if that's what you're promoting as the leader of a state, I don't know why would there be a surprise, and what I would expect people to say. Like, what I'm getting at is people literally blaming him like he was, I don't know why anyone even on his side would think this was a good idea, but he was, seen giving his condolences to the victims of the shooting 2 days ago in Jacksonville, said just the most hollow things like, oh, don't worry, we've increased security on the college campus. And I'm just like, that has what has nothing to do with anything.
He also pushed his lackeys in the legislature to pass permitless carry.
Yeah. So again, coming full circle, the two-faced kind of policy making that's going on or not going on, that is just, it doesn't add up. Even if we wanted to agree, it's like, okay, you're right. Mental health crisis, poverty crisis. How are you working towards that? Oh wait, you're working against that too. Yeah. Right. So we're back to square one. So, all right. Anyway. All right.
So I don't want to leave people without the sense that there's hope.
Yeah. So yeah. I'll say, what's your perspective more on responsible gun ownership and where, stuff like that, where we can arrive at a commonality?
What, 90% of gun owners are responsible? They lock up their guns. They are practice gun safety like they learned as kids. Responsible gun owners are not the issue. It's irresponsible manufacturers, lobbyists, and politicians. That's who we need to pay attention to. Like I said, my son-in-law is a hunter. We enjoy eating venison and pheasant and duck and all that. My son-in-law is not the issue.
Yeah.
The issue is the people who are passing laws to increase access to guns and increase access to even more powerful guns.
Yeah. So we keep coming back to the same kind of people responsible is what I'm gathering.
Right. So in our area, we have candidates who are running to promote sensible gun laws. I'm not going to mention names because I don't think you want to get into the political piece of this, but
no, that's okay. I mean, I'm not. Okay. We've already done that.
All right.
Enough on one side.
Bob Beckman is running for Senate in Senate District 5. He's running against a longtime Republican who never votes for anything that makes sense gun-wise. Now, he doesn't have a whole lot of chance of getting elected this round, but maybe next round because of the proportion of Republicans and Democrats in Senate District 5. We have Lily Franklin in 41, Delegate 41, who has a very good chance of winning, who's running this issue. And in Senate 4, which is Roanoke to Blacksburg, Tricia White Boyd is running on this issue as well.
Okay.
So, we've got a chance to really work to elect these people, but we need people to get out and canvass, phone call, vote.
Yes. We're very pro-voting on here. Can you break down? So I wanted you to name them because I don't see any point in ducking saying names like that. I'm not a proclaimed, I'm really not, proclaimed Democrat, Republican. I'm trying to have these conversations, and I'm very, in this argument, pro-life and pro-safety for people. And so like, I want, I want you to say those names, and listeners, I want you to look these people up and make your best, decision with voting and be informed. Don't take our word for it. But I wanted you to put some names out there. It's fine.
Critical this is in 20 and 21, when Northam was governor and the Democrats controlled the Senate and the House of Delegates, they passed some very good, strong gun laws, including background checks for all gun sales.
So I was going to say, can you, other than, for anybody who might think you have a Democratic, agenda by saying names, like, can you break down specifically as it relates to our conversation some things that those candidates related to gun violence would implement?
Well, first of all, we have to keep the gun laws that were passed in the last legislative session. Governor, what's his name?
Youngkin,
and the Republicans who controlled the House and the Republicans in the Senate tried to overturn those laws, and were stopped by 3 Democratic Senate votes.
Okay.
So if people want to keep and let alone strengthen the laws that we have, you're not going to be voting for Republicans because they just vote the party line.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay. Listeners, do research, but that's very helpful knowledge.
It didn't used to be this way. There used to be Republicans who I voted for and Democrats I voted against. Who were on the side of this issue that I disagreed with.
Well, exactly. And so I've heard people say, like, try to gaslight and say, like, it might have been in some of the clips from the Republican debate, but somebody saying, I can't believe you would, people are, I don't know, holding the Republican Party accountable for this gun stuff when the Democratic Party was the most pro-gun party to begin with. Whatever. I don't know when that was, but when I hear stuff like that, I just want to say, you must think some of us are just stupid, because that was obviously, things change,
right?
And it doesn't mean people can't change what they think based on policy. And so anyway, that bothered me as well for the historians out there. I'm like, that's fine. What does that have to do with what's happening right now?
I'll tell you, in 1993, when the Brady Bill was finally passed, the person who led that was Republican Mike Castle from Delaware, who I spent time talking with because I talked with him when I was a Delaware voter. And he said, the NRA doesn't even bother me anymore. I'm not, but that was 93.
Yeah.
Right? And we had John Dingell, who was a Democrat from Detroit, who was good on other issues, but was a total NRA lackey on this one.
Yeah.
So, but things have changed. The party, the Republican Party has gone along on the extreme right with the NRA. The NRA used to be much more gun safety oriented.
Yeah.
But once Wayne LaPierre took it in after Columbine and said, we're not going to give an inch. That's when things really, really changed with the NRA.
Yeah. Real quick, can you explain, because that's the most common one that I hear talked about, but I want people to actually understand it, what the Brady Law is?
Yes, the Brady law as passed, where people buy guns from federally licensed dealers, they must undergo a background check.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's an insta check where it doesn't take very long. It's more computerized.
Okay, great. And that's what has resulted from that being passed.
That hundreds of thousands of people who tried to buy a gun from a federally licensed dealer were turned down.
Okay, yeah, that's great. All right. Well, usually this is kind of the meat of what we talk about, but for whatever reason, we had to go a bunch of different directions. But okay, so racially speaking, what are some of I know some, but what are some of the racial implications of gun violence and how it affects people of color disproportionately? Because I've read and been in a lot of conversations of how that's the reality and how, I guess, political leaders, how people respond to it very much correlates to race often.
So first of all, as we discussed with Jacksonville, Black people are targets.
Yeah.
And brown people. I mean, you remember, I'm sure after the stochastic terroristic language coming out of the White House about China and COVID, how people of Asian descent looks were attacked.
Of course.
For people who live in distressed neighborhoods, as I said before, there is a higher rate of gun violence, and the number one cause of death for all American children and teens is gun violence, disproportionately so among Black males. And for the reasons that we discussed earlier.
Right. Yeah, that's great. I think that element, obviously I'm always going to think something like that's important, but is important because I think as you look at how legislation is applied or not applied, there's just very often a racial element when it affects, like you said, Black and brown people.
Well, if you trace
disproportionately
the history of guns in this country and go back to after slavery technically ended, it's a big push to arm white people to protect themselves.
Right. Absolutely. Or even when migration, people started immigrating from even Europe, and whatnot. There was a big, push for, let's arm ourselves for,
right.
with these foreigners coming in.
Against racial minorities like Irish and Italians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll say this, I'm not just saying this stuff with empty words, but I heard some clips, and this is again in politics. It's hard to get, away from it with some of these conversations because of who's holding so much of the power and responsibility. Mm-hmm. Mostly I know you're fine, Karen. I'm mostly talking to our listeners that might not like the politics talk too much, but I heard a clip from I think Vivek Ramaswamy, who is an Indian man, in one of the Republican debates, hoping to run for president. He essentially, I don't know if you heard this, it was responding to Jacksonville. He's essentially blaming Black people for that happening. And when I say that, people might hear me say that, but that's got to be a stretch. I'd ask you guys to go listen to it, but I'll paraphrase a little bit and just say, essentially said, blame Black people for the wokeness and the tension, essentially blaming Black people, saying you guys can't let this racism thing go. Mm-hmm. So because of that, all this tension is rising, and the result is going to be that people shoot you.
Right.
That is not that. essentially in a very eloquent, roundabout way. He is super charismatic, very smart, very eloquent with his speech, is what he was saying. And saying that, if we can't,
It's the same logic that people who abuse their spouses use.
mm-hmm.
You didn't
Yeah.
put my chair in the right place so when I get home, I know exactly how I can slip into it. So I'm going to hit you because you didn't do things right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Same logic.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, that's I just in a thought I had when I listened to a clip of that, and I was just like, he, as a brown man trying to run for president, of course he's got that title to be able to feel like he can freely say whatever. But yeah, I took that, as he literally was blaming black people that something like that happened,
right?
Completely sidestepping everything we've talked about, the rhetoric in Florida and all that jazz, Trump and all that. Just
people like him who are really wealthy and articulate and glib and think they're all that, think they can talk about any subject with authority, because they're successful. I mean, the arrogance of that is astounding.
Mm-hmm. Well, I thought we were going to end on a little more positive note, but maybe that's not possible. Do you have something? Quasi hopeful to end on? Because let's wrap up. I know we got to go.
We can elect people to the House and the Senate who will keep our strong gun laws and hopefully improve and pass others that will make it less likely that in Virginia, people will die and get shot and wounded from gun violence. We can do that, but it's not going to happen overnight. We have to work for it. Secondly, in the states that have passed strong gun laws, let alone countries, the chances of people being hurt by gun violence are much less. And in places like Australia, you can count the number of shootings, less than 100, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Shootings, the whole country.
Yeah.
We can do this. We can do this. We can do big things in this country if we decide to.
Yeah. Everyone do your homework. Election year, but it's not just presidents. It's many more people. We have the
up and down the belt. Every single race matters. There's this book. It's showing backwards. It's called American Carnage.
Okay.
Shattering the Myths That Fuel Gun Violence by Thomas Gabor and Fred Guttenberg. Fred Guttenberg's daughter, Jamie, was killed at Parkland.
Okay.
Gabor is a lifelong researcher on gun violence, and it's a terrific book.
Okay, that's fantastic. Yeah, I'll put that in the show notes, and I might get a couple more links from you to put in there. Karen, thank you for your time.
Sure. We didn't even get to everything.
I know. That's what always happens, though. I'll have to have you back, but your wealth of knowledge and this was good. This listeners, if you've made it all the way to the end, power to you as well. Look, this conversation is I think just one that more of us need to have, because I think it can help. Not because of any special thing about me or Karen or anybody, but real things need to be talked about when lives are being lost. And, I think hopefully this is helpful, listeners. But thank you guys, everyone, for listening. Please reach out at racialspeakingpod at gmail.com. I'll tag Karen. You can reach out to her. She's on, I think it's your name is your handle on Instagram. I got your email address now.
Yep, I'd be happy to talk to anybody.
Absolutely, yeah. Karen was very generous early on in our relationship. Just came all the way to Radford, and we sat down, had coffee together. So, even though
and you fed your baby.
Yeah, even though I bashed just having lighthearted conversation over coffee, we did do that. So there's me confessing. But yeah, please reach out to us. Many of you have all my contact information, so I don't want these conversations to be in a vacuum. Many of y'all know that now. But all right, thank you guys. We'll see you guys next time. The music you are listening to is done by our friend Dylan Dent. Our artwork is created by Ashley Bush, and we'll be back soon. Bye.
The nightmare might scare you, no worse than reality. They hunt you by day, R.I.P. Ahmaud Arbery. Everybody got a time, but that's less than comforting. I hope I'm alive by the time they choose to comfort me. Mosquitoes in the vein, or leeches on my soul. This money on my mind is a fracture in my bones. You get crippled by continuing existence like a ghost. And they wonder why we drink, and they wonder why we smoke, and they wonder why we think that everything's a joke. I'm shocked that we can sleep, must be the thought of letting go. Now I lay me down to sleep, I'm better with the valley.